listening to the 14th Source for all geeky and nerd news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am Dee Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, June 3rd, 2022, or as I like to call it, approximately, maybe, perhaps, episode 417, give or take. That's my math.
Did you just make that up?
No, I did math. That's 52 times 8 because even though it's the first week of June, I like to spend some time at the end of May, if you will. I like to share one final Maymory, if you will. I'm so embarrassed with that fun.
No, you're fired.
Because in between the last episode and this episode, we celebrated our 8th anniversary on the internet. What's wrong with the internet?
What's wrong?
We should have been shut down by now.
What's wrong with us?
I know.
I think that's the real thing.
Well, I think it's the paychecks that are really keeping us doing this. Oh wait,
love them paychecks. Them negative paychecks.
Them negative paychecks. We do this because we love to talk to each other. Honestly, I was going to make a joke, but I'm like, no, that's why we do this. We're best friends, so we are going to do this again this week.
Yes,
we are. For the premiere episode of June 2022, where things are only marginally worse than they were before. Oh. But that's the outside world. We're talking about our little world. And actually, this week we like to I don't know. We don't make plans here, just dear listeners. But it is the beginning of Pride Month.
Yes.
And we figured we would actually talk about that in a roundabout way, and specifically in a nerdy and geeky way.
And also just really because, as we like to talk about, Dan is watching Star Trek: The Next Generation and loving it. And
Andrew's greatest success story is getting me to fall in love with The Next Generation.
And as it ends up, you recently watched an episode of The Next Generation that historically is kind of referred to as the awkward gay episode,
right? Or
Star Trek's really bad attempt at doing a gay episode,
right?
And so we thought it would be interesting to talk about it because, well, I mean, there's something interesting about it, right?
Right. So like, as I do with most times I'm watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, I'm texting Andrew the entire time while watching, which is probably bad form for me actually watching the episode. But I was watching the Outcast, a season 5 episode towards the end of the season. I'm not sure which specific number it is. I'm like, wow, this is actually kind of like a pretty like on the nose for one, but also kind of powerful metaphor for shit that's going on right now. And you found out the episode, and you're like, really? That's historically speaking, that's kind of like the awkward we don't talk about that episode. I'm like, oh,
right. So for those who don't know, the Outcast was like you said, a season 5 episode, and basically it's, if you go read like kind of the production history, it came about from hey, this is Star Trek, we're supposed to do
right,
kind of progressive stuff or whatever, and
what would Gene say?
And so it's like, well, we've never really tackled gay stuff, Oh, we should have a gay episode. And people, like fans, have been writing saying, when are you going to do feature something gay? Because it's, it was the early 90s at this point. And, there's a more public attention to, at least at that time, there was, gay and lesbian issues. And, Star Trek.
Go read the X-Men, folks.
Right. And Star Trek is a show that's, often broached social issues in the context of science fiction. I mean, we always talk about some of the classic original series episodes that were, hey, racism? ? So
Kirk kisses a black lady.
So they do this episode, and so we're going to talk a little bit about it, right? So it features, like any good Star Trek episode, some weird science thing, There's there's some a strange alien people's lost a shuttle, and there's negative space or null space. Okay, yeah. So let's it's all just it's the motivator to introduce this species of people, the Genii, who have no gender in their society. They are, I guess. Nowadays we have so many words to describe this. I think I want to say it's not asexual. They're they're genderless. They have no gender. Agendered, I guess. There's no male and female. They're just one type of person in their society.
Yes.
And they all go to the same tailor. So it's my favorite Star Trek thing. Like, wow, this planet they only have one costume. Yeah. But anyway, so it's this to introduce this alien species, and through the course of the episode, one of them is paired with our smooth operator Commander Will Riker. And it becomes this exploration of him saying, well, what's it like to be in this genderless society, and this person Soren saying, well, what is it like to be in a gendered society? Wow, that's weird. And of course the reveal that this person Soren is in fact secretly gendered, which is a forbidden thing in their society. And of course, somehow Riker instantly falls in love with this person. And wants,
because in his defense, I think he's secretly in love with every person.
He's one of these guys, right? He's he meets someone that they grab a hold of him like that,
Right. Well, not to quote not to get all like academic here, but to quote a philosopher, one Jay of Jay and Silent Bob from the documentary Clerks, quote, "I'll fuck anything that moves." I think it's kind of Riker's ethos.
Well, but I think there's a suggestion that he's just really quick to like form strong connections with people. Yes. If you think back to the first time we see him with Minuet, right, and suddenly he's like, I'm in love with her. And to the point where an alien recreates her thinking, oh, this was his lost love, after an hour in the holodeck with that one, so anyway, so it's just,
Riker deserves a whole like thesis on his own. Like that man is a
So it's this story about an alien species where they don't have gender, except sometimes people in their society do have gender. They do have this idea that they know that they're male or female, but
because I should say the society used to be gender,
and they evolved beyond that, I believe is what they say, so it's supposed to be this like, oh look, it's aliens. What we're really talking about is gay. And at the time, it was like, this is kind of like, not ham-fisted, but okay. Swing and a miss, I think, is what... they say they got a lot of negative fan mail. So there were some from, like, conservatives saying, oh, you can't do this on my Star Trek. But they actually said they got more negative fan mail from kind of from gay people saying, like, wow, you really fucked that one up, Or half-assed it, I believe, is kind of the idea.
Sure,
So it's interesting, because I had not thought of the episode. I haven't watched it in years. But then you watched it, right?
Yeah. And I found it actually, to be clear, like I am a straight, cisgendered white male. So my point of view is very narrow in scope. But as a person that is conscious of social issues, that generally moves by the ethos of like, be nice to people, let people live their lives, and support their happiness, it's hard to ignore how there is a segment of our country that is actively trying to keep people from living their life in happiness. And specifically trans people, right? I think with that so present in the news, in my everyday life as a teacher, I interact with trans people on a regular basis. I found it actually kind of powerful in its own way. I mean, with all the trappings of it being a 30-year-old episode, with it actually literally, I think at this point,
almost 29 in your episode,
and bad fashion, bad haircuts aside, right? Like what's interesting is that this is such a great sort of expression of what art is supposed to be, that art survives not because someone decrees that it's important, and therefore, although that can be part of it, but what makes art stick around is that it's applicable from era to era, from generation to generation. And I think it's particularly interesting, like, this episode was maybe maligned when it was created, I think has maybe more relevance, more prominence. It could, I should say, have more relevance, prominence, and impact in modern culture than it did at the time it was created.
Right.
Right.
I think one of the things that's especially timely for you to have watched it like this month is, we're currently looking at, in the United States, many states around the country are trying to basically make gender affirming care illegal, or
right.
And although having gender in an agender society isn't the same as like a gender dysphoria or whatever, but there's a lot of like, right. it's gender related, and there's this idea of what you are is not allowed.
Right.
Your gender is somehow not allowed, and
yeah.
I do. It is so I rewatched it thinking about this, and it is weird that it's. Although it actually, I think you're right. It has this. It's like, oh, this was made in the early '90s. Okay, there's some things where it's like the way they talk about gender roles are like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess it might, but
yeah, just. Yeah, what's it like to be attracted to women, Riker? Well, they're mysterious. It's like, fucking calm down, bro.
But it is. It isn't. I do think it is a funny thing, though. That now suddenly the story makes more sense in this context. That I think the big thing is what I mean to say is talking about is that I don't think a lot of people had had a familiarity with trans
right.
experiences in 1993. There were obviously there have been trans people for a long time, but
of course.
even by 1993 there were already like known trans people, but most of us didn't have these experiences, hadn't didn't like. I have many friends now that are trans, so it's a different experience now for me to watch it and be like, this it's something I think I see a little bit more of. Like this story seems a little bit like I definitely feel like it feels more like a trans story than it does a gay story, but yeah, it is a weird thing, and
well, yeah. I think you speak to something that's really important, not to get off the sort of the theme of our episode, but I think it's an important concept to discuss, and we've talked about it before in relation to other artists for very different reasons. I don't want to say art versus artist, but I want to say something that's talked a lot about in literary theory discussions, which is the value of authorial intent, right? That they were trying to create a gay episode, and by the standards of the day, they failed.
Or at least they were coolly received.
Yeah. But one of the biggest, especially since the 50s when new criticism came into, was a theory that came into literary discussion, which is basically saying authorial intent doesn't matter. What matters is, and this kind of also is just sort of an expression of what makes art, is that a creator can make stuff, but is it really tangible? Is it feasible? Is it art? Until an audience absorbs it. And how they absorb it is not decided by and not controlled by the artist. And however, whatever theme and meaning that the artist put into it is not necessarily what the audience is going to get out of it. And what makes art is the audience interpretation of it. Right, and we all have been we've all read those interviews or heard the discussions of musicians or writers going on tirades about like, oh no, they misinterpreted me. I'm like, well no, they interpreted what they interpreted. Like that's not, there's no right or wrong. And this is actually, so what I'm getting at is like what we're seeing here is kind of an interesting iteration of something that has been in the literary discussion for a long time. It's like, what makes art, and what I said at the beginning of this section is that, what makes art last is not what the author says it means. It's how it's remembered and how it's used, how it's applicable in the eras that come after its creation, right? If, like, the thing is, like, Shakespeare was popular. He was the Michael Bay of his day, but he was not the only one. He was, I mean, honestly, that's not far of an exaggeration. And also, he was not the most popular of his day. He was popular among many other playwrights. But what makes him survive is, sure, there's a classification, there was a codification of quote-unquote great books that happened by old white men in a room somewhere, but also there's the word-of-mouth aspect of it, that his plays, more than other people that were perhaps more popular in his day, that finds applicability throughout the ages. Another good example of this is something I was actually just reading about. The actual artist I was reading about, I don't remember the name of, but Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh, however you want to say his name, died poor, died unknown, and died without any sort of legacy. But it wasn't until after his death when people preserved his paintings and started not posting, but you know what I mean.
Started posting in
presenting,
galleries. Yeah.
Right, presenting his paintings, reproducing his paintings, that sure we kind of we ascribe to him as like, oh, he's the mad artist. But what actually makes his art survive, what puts it onto the walls of everybody's from grandmothers to college kids, is whatever applicability they find in those paintings, whether it's ironic, whether it's nostalgic, whether it's aesthetic. And I think that's something we're going to see more of in the ensuing years as nerdy pop culture becomes older and older. That the actual importance of it is something that can't be decided at the time of its creation and release. I did not like the way that sounded. It's something that's decided by history, and we can't decide that until history happens. And I think this is a really interesting example of it. Again, I'm not the best authority to decide that this episode is important or interesting, but I think it's a fascinating case study. It's like, wow, is this episode more relevant now than it was when it aired, when it actually received a negative sort of kind of reception?
Yeah, and I don't think either of us are really in the position to say, gosh, this episode's good or it's better now.
Nope.
I mean, but
we're tastemakers. Let's decide it here.
But I think it's more the idea that you know, you might say, like, they're kind of ham-fisted attempt to do an allegorical discussion of gay rights. And to be clear, if you go watch the episode, there's a bit at the end where they put the character of Soren basically on trial for being gendered, and it very much has a scene that was like a gay liberation, you know, speech, where it's like, no, we just want to, you know, we living, loving, just like you know, we want to just live our lives. We're not harming you, and it very much felt like the kind of, you know, the like I said, the gay liberation kind of speech you see in movies of that era, right? And I think if it were made nowadays, and I think what's interesting is to think if it were made nowadays, what would be different? How would it, you know, how would they? Because I think there would be different discussions.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Also, because Star Trek is more closely interacting with you know, both gay and, you know, lesbian, bisexual, and trans narratives now, especially with Discovery, where, you know, they're just like half the cast is LGBTQ.
That's what I was wondering. Like, is it more of them kind of directly addressing those stories in sort of serialized episodes, which of course, aside from Strange New Worlds, they aren't really, episodic kind of presentations. They are addressing, they're approaching story more serialized now than not, right? Or is it simply like, oh, we have gay, trans, and you know, non-binary characters as members of the cast?
It's more that.
Okay.
And I think, but it would be weird, right? Like, not weird. It would be like if I try to imagine something like Discovery, like doing an episode like this, it would be very different because you literally have people in the cast who are like, well, I mean, you know, this character is trans, this character is you know, gay or lesbian, or, you know, even in Picard, this character is, you know, bisexual, this character's. So it wouldn't be so like foreign, you know, because one of the things about this Next Generation episode is that this idea of someone who has gendered and agendered society is like so foreign, right? In fact, there's even a scene that's I will say, is awkward now, where Riker is trying to interact with Soren and is confused about personal pronouns. Like, well, I can't say he or she. What do I say? It? And like, wow, you're like everyone's shitty dad on the internet right now. And because, you know, nowadays a lot of people, although some people still fight it, a lot of people are like, oh, you can just say they. Like, we accept that works. But of course, that wasn't something people really thought about in 1993. So instead, it's this awkward, clunky conversation.
Doesn't he make the arguments like where he says like it, but like in our culture, that is like a diminutive, like
that would be like it would be like
dehumanizing
to say
it. So like he recognizes that at least.
Yeah.
And I was actually because I was just taking out of time for a second, I was totally expecting for Soren to go like, oh no, they works. But I'm like, oh no.
Right. And again, I was actually thinking the same thing.
Everybody missed the memo.
Yeah. Because I didn't remember, I was like, oh, are they just going to come to that conclusion? No, the conclusion is that they don't really use personal pronouns.
Right.
So, but it would be, I just think it would be interesting if they did an episode like this nowadays, where you had like something like this, how different it would be, how... But they just how like I think more how the humans react to it, because one of the other things that was kind of remembering it's 1993 is Dr. Crusher. They had this whole discussion about what makes women and men, and there's this weird thing. Oh, women, we have makeup. Or, oh, you color your face. Like, yeah, men don't do that. I'm like, okay, that's that's just because it was 1993, and then this idea that what women are used to be treated as inferior, but now we know better, and then Worf literally drops this. Was it a poker game with too many wild cards is a woman's game? I know he's Klingon, but still.
It's actually an interesting contrast with an episode that comes a few episodes later in the season called "The Perfect Mate." With Famke Johnson playing Jean Grey. I mean,
you just want to set up this joke about the X-Men, don't you?
Yeah, no.
Where Famke Janssen plays an empathic character who has to interact with Patrick Stewart playing
I believe she plays a character named Kamala, I believe. About this sort of engineered woman, the perfect mate whose job it is to completely satisfy the men basically around her at the time until she bonds with one. Where Crusher also has a kind of like, an argument saying like, this is incorrect, this is wrong, this is like, we need to, she needs to be a person that has her own choices, that makes her own decisions in her life, which Picard argues is kind of interfering with the Prime Directive. That episode has its own... Yeah. That episode is interesting. I was reading about it. Like they wrote 4 endings. They filmed 2. Everybody was scared of that episode, right? Which I feel like in current, if they were making Next Generation now with these sort of episodic, like I guess they are Strange New Worlds in a sense, though they don't seem to be making episodes about specific societal issues.
Well, they did, right? Let's not spend too much time talking about. They literally, suggested that the January 6th insurrection is the prelude to the eugenics war. So
right. Hey, sometimes history writes itself. Fuck. But I feel like they would be more careful and nervous about writing the Outcast now than maybe they would about The Perfect Mate, because there's a lot more acceptance of because what the Perfect Mate is really about is kind of like Americans dealing with outside cultures. It seems like arranged marriages and stuff like that, as well as feminism. But the kind of the hot potato of the two right now would be like, how do we balance the transgender identity and have this be a good episode as well as being something that isn't offensive. And it's interesting. There's no conclusions here. It's just like it's fascinating looking at this show that is trying to say something about the society that it's in at the time, this sort of historicist kind of approach, and seeing how that translates over time, which I think is probably the best part about Star Trek. That it has an inherent utilitarianism outside of the culture it was written for.
It's always, I think, one of the things that's what I'd like to see is when you go look at Star Trek episodes, especially older ones, and like, wow, there are themes that really still resonate, even when they have themes that are like actually really like surprisingly backwards.
Right.
People like to joke about the original pilot for the original series. Captain Pike expresses concern about having to serve with women, or something like that. Like,
right.
Oof.
Right.
Right.
Right. But there's a historical context, right? There's the old seafarings, like, women on a boat are bad luck and shit like that. I don't know if that's what his argument was.
Oh no, it's just. I mean, this original series also suggested at one point that women can't be captains. Again, because that was the time, But
right.
but yet they could still have episodes that approach these ideas of I still always think of Let This Be Your Last Battlefield, where you have Frank Gorshin and the other guy painted black and white on different sides of the face, and like, you guys hate each other because your faces are the different colors, and it's like this what
right,
even though that was obviously a timely thing of the day. So I think really what I'm trying to say is I do appreciate that they can have a story like this one, like the Outcast, that still feels like, who knows, right? In 30 years, it may go back to being kind of hunky, or kind of chunky, right? But for now,
so you think for now, like, I guess that's a question I have for you more than anything, is it's like, did you kind of see what I say? Like, because I didn't have the historical context of it. It was like, I think of the episode from Buffy called Beer Bad. It's like, kids, don't drink beer. Don't drink beer. It's bad for you. Oops, failed. But like, unlike that, did you find it has more, there's applicability and usefulness for this episode more now than it was then, or kind of what was your takeaway from it? You've insinuated at it, you've talked about it, but kind of like...
No, I think it is... I would say that hands down the episode is closer to a trans narrative, at least it seems to me, than it is a gay narrative. Although there's overlap, right? Because there's the big emphasis, I say, is this idea of, and I think kind of the living in secret thing, which is actually probably more of a gay thing.
Sure.
Because one of the in trans, like, you literally do recast yourself in a different light, whereas like at the time, like, gay people living in the shadows doing gay things. But at the same time, the idea that they chose for their their analog is literally gender identity. Like, oof, that's why it's like, although this was supposed to be about gay stuff, what you chose just is a little too on the nose for what
their cover for gay stuff was gender identity,
which at the time probably, again, most people weren't thinking about it, but now it's like, wow, that's a bit like,
that's the thing, like, it's still like on the nose. You're like, like, I'm watching this like, oh guys, you guys, okay, you're doing a trans episode. And for me, like, I wasn't even thinking, I was like, oh, this is 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Jesus, math is hard. I'm like, oh, no, they weren't thinking about that at all.
No, they weren't. It was the thing they chose, like, oh, it's close enough, right? Yeah.
Right.
And, yeah. So
but it's still on the nose, it's still kind of cheesy, and it has awkward bits in its own way. But, like, the thing is, as I was reading in some of the write-ups about it, it's like, that kind of dissonance, that kind of attempt is what Gene Roddenberry wanted the show to be about, right? And even though it's not perfect, it never will be. The fact that this mainstream popular show attempted it at all is at least and that seems very apologetic in its own way, but like at least a mainstream science fiction show that's trying to sell itself to as many channels and networks as possible, because it was a syndicated show. We're still willing to be like, let's just fucking challenge stuff, right, and see how it goes. Failure or not, a success or not, was pretty cool. Even in its clunkiness,
right? Well, and it's interesting because I think, just for a larger context, Star Trek actually struggled with basically queer concepts for a long time.
Sure.
Even with Deep Space Nine, where they had two ladies kissing. The showrunner Ira Stephen Barry even says, like, no, they failed. Like, they had opportunities to do queer stories, and the one they did was bad, or at least not great. And then Voyager My understanding with Voyager, there was an intent discussion about having a queer character, and at that point, it was just deemed too risky or something, right?
But then they got it right with Enterprise, right?
No. Literally, the first. I mean, it isn't until Discovery in 2019, where at this point, instead of having a gay episode, they just have gay characters that. And there's no brace yourself. It's just literally, hey, this guy walks into his quarters and there's his partner, the also male doctor,
right?
And then they just casually introduce another character who refers to her dead wife, and you're like, oh, and then they have, but again, it was never, this is an episode about queer stuff. It was always just, we're just now going to have these characters around all the time,
right? That's cool, right? I think that's important because it's about normalization, right?
Right. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that they should have, here's the episode about queer stuff.
Well, that's the thing I wonder about because why not do that as well, right? Because it's still, especially if science fiction, especially Star Trek, is a commentary, a satirization even, but most importantly a challenging of the society in which it's being created. Why not also have episodes? And I think a lot of this can be explained away by saying, well, it's serialized television, right? We're telling a bigger story. Why, with something like Strange New Worlds, with something like even like the Orville, right? That's coming back this week. Why not also have stories or singular episodes that focus on very direct issues because trans people, gay people are being murdered, right? This is not an issue that's gone away.
Being trans is in some places becoming illegal, or at least
right,
yeah,
right. And these are things that need to be talked about and addressed and probed and problem posed, and these popular mediums, these popular venues of television, of movies, of comic books, of comic movies, are perfect allegories to address that stuff. And yes, I think it's important to have characters that are trans, that are gay, that are everything. But that only partially addresses the issue that there are people in that same society, in our society today, that say those people don't deserve to live. That's fucked, right? And like I was saying about with the Outcast, as clunky as it was, I think it's important for that episode to exist. And I think the conclusion I'm coming to is that we could do that better today than we could back then. Why not do that? And I think ultimately it comes down to serialized television versus episodic television, and episodic television doesn't really exist in the hour-long drama, nerdy kind of world right now.
Although we'll see, right?
Yeah.
Because I said, so. There's, and I think the Orville, we did talk a little bit about it, that they did, they had, with all of their own issues, right? And really that issue being Seth MacFarlane, they definitely, they tried to do that kind of thing. And I think we talked about it before, I think in certain ways, to significant success, or maybe, maybe success, because some of those are, like I said, it's the Orville, But who knows? I do think I do hope to see, where these kind of issues, like in a show like Strange New Worlds, may come up. And especially in an era where people are complaining about Star Trek having these characters, right?
Right.
There are people who are upset that Picard features basically a bisexual character. Well,
it's weird that it wasn't until 2022 that Star Trek finally became woke and it bowed to the liberal agenda.
Just when did Star Trek become so woke? Well, 1967 or so.
Right. I'd include that Fox News article in our link, but I don't want to link to them.
Yeah, I don't want to. So what we're referring to is about 2 weeks ago, Fox News had an editorial.
It was after the first episode of Strange New Worlds came out, right? They
basically said that that Star Trek is too woke, and it's so many people are like, what show were you watching?
Yeah, it has been since day one, bro.
And let's be clear, like Star Trek was, it never goes super far, right? Like this is what I'm saying. Like even in the 90s, they were very, very uncomfortable doing certain things, but they still were doing things. And actually, and I would say that that now that we look back and we see some things that actually, there's this you mentioned about its authorial intent, where certain characters are now being adopted as icons of certain, like for example, a lot of people always post an image from Deep Space Nine about trans rights, where the Klingons say, hey, Curzon, my old friend, and she's like, no, it's Jadzia now, and they're like, Jadzia, my old friend. It's like, well, the Klingons get it, right?
If they can get it, anybody can, right?
But yeah, I think I think it's a positive direction either way, and I hope to see Star Trek do more with it. Woke Trek.
Star Trek's good.
Yeah, no.
So there you go.
It is. It's a good time, and
it's not your birthday month, but happy birthday! We had an all Star Trek episode for you, Andrew.
There you go. It's not my birthday. We're not even. I guess actually I would say not even close, but actually it is getting close.
It's kind of close. Yeah, we're getting old.
So yeah, Woke Trek, good times, even in 1993.
So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on other social media, such as Twitter and Instagram, where you can find us at our respective handles. On Twitter, you can find Andrew at Profound Dark, tweeting about tabletop role-playing games, and you can find me at dbethel. You can also find us on Instagram, where you can find Andrew at Profound Brick, and me and my work at dbethel comics.
While you're on our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you actually may already be on, listening to, because we now have our show on YouTube, like all the cool kids. And if you do, as we like to say, like and subscribe, ring the bell, as some of them say. Ring the bell. Whatever. Click the little button that looks like a bell that says subscribe. There we go.
Just do this. Yeah, you know what to do. It's YouTube. Everybody. It's pretty self-explanatory. What is also self-explanatory is that we use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. And they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clown McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire. You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License. If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to go to their storefront and leaving some sort of review. Whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms.
Oh, I'm actually a little anxious because we're currently getting to it's warming up in Seattle, but also there's still humidity in the air, so it's like...
Oof, that's a bad time.
Yeah,
that's a bad
not
time.
Not a big fan.
Welcome to Dad Talk, where we talk about the weather. Oh boy, let me bring it back on track. I have, since now the semester has ended and grades are submitted, I am like mid-shin deep in the Highlander novelization. And let me tell you what, it's fun times. It actually kind of feels like a Terrence Dicks novel because it bounces back and forth between like current times and old-timey Scottish times, and anytime he's back in old-timey Scottish times, and this is where Terrence Dicks comes into play. Where if you've read anything written by Terrence Dicks, a Doctor Who writer who wrote like basically all of the novelizations of the episodes in England, he had like what they call Terrence Dicksisms, where like he had these turns of phrase that he always came back to. And in this book, anytime they're talking about 1500 Scotland, like, oh, and then the blood flew over the heather. Or, and like turned the heather red. I'm like, just leave the heather alone. But it's good times. It's good times. It's fun because the thing I'm interested in is that, without a doubt, the novelization was based on the original script, which, and that's the case for a lot of novelizations. And so what you get in the novelization is more close to maybe what the writer wanted than what you saw in theaters. Not saying it's better or worse, it's just different. And so I'm eager to keep diving into it and seeing what differences remain and kind of how it fleshes out the very abstract nature of that original film that did not get answered in the sequel. So until, dear listeners, you get answers, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
If you'd like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use, whether it's the... we don't do that anymore. One more time. If you like the show and like to help us... So we've gone through too many scripts now, and now I don't know which one to use.
Do whatever you want, man.
That's a clean episode. Just bam. Look at this. Start to finish, A to B. Straightest distance between 2 points are best friends. I punched my pop filter like the punk that it is.
Yeah, that's a good point, really. It'd be rude to talk about Sonic without him. I mean, I said, I was
the biggest Sonic apologist I've ever met.
Those movies are pretty good, though.
He's Plato to Sonic's
Socrates. Yeah, I'm dead and I don't know how to record.
Recording is an important part of the podcasting process. What makes the conversation digital and repeatable.
Oh, I just gotta get air moving because it's
a
stagnant, humid waters.